Hey there folks, it's Blue here at Blue Bears Games, and for today's video, I will be showing you my latest custom build that I made using Balan Wandering Knight as the commander. Again. You heard that right folks, and no, this is not a Groundhog's Day situation. Immediately after I released the first Balan custom build video, someone messaged me asking me for a similar build, except I was given a much more modest budget of $60, and this time, all of the cards will be coming from my collection. Before I get to today's video, I want to first take a moment to ask for your help in supporting my channel. The easiest and cheapest ways to show your support are by liking my videos, subscribing to the channel if you haven't yet, sharing any of my content on your socials, and or by watching some of my many other videos that I've created over the years. Additionally, you can support the channel by purchasing Super Thanks, channel memberships, decks that you may have seen on the channel directly from me on the Blue Bears Games Facebook page, and or visiting our sponsor, Arcane Fortress, by using the link that just popped up at the top of your screen and purchasing any of their amazing gaming supplies from them. By using that link specifically, you should receive a 5% discount store-wide. And finally, the last thing you can possibly do to help the channel out is through donations of extra cards that you may have just lying around. Even your bulkiest of bulk will help immensely, so if you'd like to donate to the channel, please message me on the Blue Bears Games Facebook page or email me at bluebearsgames@gmail.com and we can discuss the logistics of how. Anything you can do to help support my small channel is greatly appreciated, and I thank you for it. Now with that out of the way, let's begin. So I already told you about Balan in the previous video, but if you didn't watch it or just don't know what it does, let me show you real quick. Balan is 2 white and 2 generic mana to cast for a 3/3 legendary cat knight with first strike and 2 other abilities. The first of those abilities says that Balan Wandering Knight has double strike as long as 2 or more equipment are attached to it. The second of those 2 abilities says that for 1 white and 1 generic mana, attach all equipment that you control to Balan. As a reminder, that second ability can be done at instant speed during any player's turn. The previous iteration of Balan that I showed you was simply just a Voltron-style commander using equipment. This version will be mostly the same, but with one small twist. That twist is I tried to incorporate more of an artifact-heavy theme with some reduction in cost to said artifacts. That probably sounds kind of vague, so why don't I just show you what I mean. Okay, so like I normally like to do, I'll start by showing you the lands that I chose. We start off with an idyllic Grange. It is a plains, so it taps to add white. It comes into play tapped unless you control 3 or more other plains. And then when it enters the battlefield untapped, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature that you control, which is absolutely great for a deck like this. Buried Ruin comes into play untapped, taps to add colorless, which is not that big of a deal in this deck because a lot of the stuff in here is going to be generic mana to cast anyway. And then you can pay 2, tap, and sack it to return target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. So that's able to get back things that would be nice utility or other equipment that you may want to get back. Access Tunnel, another land that comes into play untapped and taps to add a colorless. You can pay 3 and tap it to have target creature you control with power 3 or less not be able to be blocked until end of turn, which is great for a unequipped Balan because his power is 3 anyway. There are other creatures that are going to be in this deck that you may be able to use this on that won't have some sort of equipment on them, so it's just great overall. Rogue's Passage, it's the upgrade to that. Again, doesn't come into play tapped, taps to add 1 colorless, and then you can pay 4 and tap to have target creature become unblockable until end of turn. Myriad Landscape, this does come into play tapped, taps to add a colorless again, and then you can pay 2, tap, and sack it to go search your library for 2 basic lands that share a type. And this deck is a monocolor deck, and there are a bunch of planes in here, so that's going to be very beneficial. Encroaching Waste, because for the 50,000th time I probably said it, when I make a budget deck, I like to put something in here that helps destroy a non-basic land, because you never know what you're going to face, so this is the one I've chosen for all of my budget decks. Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse for a little bit of deck thinning, and I do mean little. There's only these 2 in here plus the Myriad Landscape, so you're only going to get 4 cards out, but there are other ways to thin the deck with searching, and I'll get to that in a little bit. And then the rest of it's going to be basic planes, and I don't remember exactly how many, but enough to make it up to 35, so if you want to see, I have the exact amount in a deck list, and that deck list is in the description of the video. Up next, we will talk about the ramp that I chose for this deck. Remember, this is a slightly upgraded deck. This was an order that was a little bit higher than my normal budget range, so I put in a couple of things that I don't normally put in my regular budget decks because if you give a little more, you get a little more. So we start off with things like Ever-Flowing Chalice. It's free to cast. However, it does nothing if you cast it for free. It has multi-kicker of 2, so for each 2 that you pay into it, you will get 1 counter out of it. and then it will tap to add a colorless mana for each counter that's on it. And the reason why I liked this one is because the theory that I chose for the direction of this deck was a little bit of cost reduction for artifacts, and that does affect the multi-kicker of this because it's an additional cost. So if I can reduce the cost of an artifact by at least 2, you get at least 1 counter for free. A Soul Ring, and an Arcane Signet, and I don't like to put Arcane Signets in monocolor decks just because they're just going to tap for white anyway, but it's a 2 to cast Mana Rock that comes into play untapped and taps to add the color you need. Felwar Stone, hopefully some opponents are playing white. Marble Diamond, Mind Stone, and Magnifying Glass is the last one. And this might look like an odd inclusion, but it's not. It's 3 to cast and taps to add a colorless, which doesn't really affect much as far as this deck goes, because there's a lot of things in here that are generic, like I said before. However, the ability to activate it by paying 4 and tapping it to investigate, which creates a clue token, is important because white doesn't have a lot of good card draw, so mid to late game, this can actually start to get you more cards in your hand. As far as the creatures for this deck go, there are 3 sections. One of them is going to be kind of like a rampy style stuff for the creatures. There's going to be stuff that deals with equipment, and then there's going to be utility. So I'll show you what I mean by the rampy style stuff. Things like Burnished Heart, who is a 3 to cast creature that's a 2/2 that you can pay 3 and just sacrifice it. There's no tap needed, so you can do it immediately. And then search your library for up to 2 basic land cards and put them onto the battlefield tapped. That'll help thin your deck a little bit. And also, because of the reduction that I have that I'm about to show you, this could actually be cast for free. And what I mean by that is I have things like Foundry Inspector, who reduces the cost of artifact spells that you cast by 1, and the same thing for Starnheim Courser, which is a 2/2 flyer that does that, and then of course Jorva's Familiar, which makes historic spells that you cast cost 1 less to cast, which includes other things other than artifacts. It includes also legendaries, which means that Balan would be cheaper, and then sagas, which I didn't put in here, so you can ignore that part. So that's the first part. That was the rampy style stuff I was talking about. Then we have stuff that deals with equipments. Some of them are actually equipments themselves, things like Lion Sash. This was actually good utility. It's a 2 to cast 1/1 that has multiple abilities. One of them that's really important is the reconfigure ability for 2. That means it can either be a 1/1 creature or an equipment that you attach to something else. That can only be done at sorcery speed, unfortunately, but the creature that it's equipped to will get +1/+1 for each +1/+1 counter on it. And the way that that happens is the first ability, which is you can pay a white to exile target card from a graveyard, and if it was a permanent, put a +1/+1 counter on Lion Sash. So it itself can grow, and it can make the creature it's attached to grow. Cloudsteel Kieran is the other equipment / creature that will be in here. It's a 3 to cast 3/2 that has flying. The equipped creature will have flying as well, and also have an ability that says you can't lose the game, and your opponents can't win the game, which is really nice. And it also has a reconfigure, only it's a little bit more expensive. It's 5. Other things that deal with the equipments are things like Ingenious Smith, a 2 to cast 1/1 that when it enters the battlefield, you look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal an artifact from among them, and put it in your hand, and put the others on the bottom of your library in a random order. And then it has another ability that says whenever 1 or more artifacts enter the battlefield under your control, you put a +1/+1 counter on Ingenious Smith, and this ability can only trigger once a turn. This is a quasi sort of secret commander, and so are a couple of other cards in here. So if you can't get Balan to get through, you can start equipping other creatures like this that'll also grow with it, with the theme of the deck. Stonehewer Giant is a 5 to cast 4/4 with a Vigilance, and an ability that for 1 white and 1 generic, and tapping it, you can simply just search your library for an equipment card, and put it onto the battlefield and attach it to a creature you control, then shuffle. That's really good. That's why this card is the most expensive card in the deck. SRAM Senior Edificer is a 2 to cast 2/2 that simply says whenever you cast an aura, which won't matter here, equipment, which will matter here, or a vehicle, which won't matter here, you draw a card. So every time you cast an equipment spell, you will be able to draw a card with this in play. A couple other secret commanders are things like Patchwork Automaton. It is a 2 to cast 1/1 with Ward 2, so it has a little bit of built-in protection. And it says whenever you cast an artifact spell in general, put a +1/+1 counter on it. And that's pretty good because you can make this guy go really big on its own without having to equip it. Pure Steel Paladin is a 2 to cast 2/2 that also can be a secret commander. It says whenever an equipment enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card, which is always nice. It's good card draw. And then it has Metalcraft. And Metalcraft means that if you have 3 or more artifacts, you can do whatever its Metalcraft ability is. In this case, it says equipment you control have an equip cost of 0 as long as you control the 3 or more artifacts. That's really big, especially with some of the equip costs on some of the equipment I'm about to show you, because remember, this is the budget deck. Another secret commander is Mere Adapter, a 3 to cast 1/1 that it gets +1/+1 for each equipment attached to it, so it can just get bigger and bigger as well. And the final creature for this part of it is Danitha Capuchin Paragon, a 3 to cast 2/2 with keyword salad here. First Strike, Vigilance, and Lifelink, all great abilities for a secret commander or even a commander itself. And it has aura and equipment spells that you cast cost 1 less to cast. That's not bad either. It doesn't reduce the cost of all of your artifacts, but just your equipment, and that's good enough to be another reduction in costs. The last section of creatures will be utility. So things like Crackdown Construct, and there's actually a second part to this that I'll go over with this card at the end of the video. But this is a 4-cast 2/2 that says whenever you activate an ability of an artifact or a creature that isn't a mana ability. So if you do something like equip an artifact or something, that's you activating an ability of an artifact. If it isn't a mana ability, which it won't be, this gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So it can be a Secret Commander, but you're going to need a lot of mana to get the +1/+1 buff up more. But then you're also equipping it, so it'll just get bigger and bigger for at least one turn. Keeper of the Accord is because this is a Voltron deck, so there's not a lot of creatures in this deck, so you're going to need some blockers. So this is a 4-cast 3/4 that says at the beginning of each opponent's end step, if that player controls more creatures than you, you create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. So can actually amount to a lot, especially if you're playing against somebody who's doing like a Scoot Swarm style of deck or a Token Swarm deck. It'll help you keep up with them a little bit. Not a lot, but a little bit. And then it says also at the beginning of each opponent's end step, if that player controls more lands than you do, search your library for a basic Plains card and put it onto the battlefield tapped. So if you're also playing against a deck that ramps a lot, you may also be able to get land out of your library and put them into play. So it can help you ramp a little too. So overall, a pretty good card for a Voltron style deck. Next up is Platoon Dispenser. This is a 5-cast 4/6 artifact construct that says at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 2 or more other creatures, draw a card. So you're going to obviously have Balan out, and there aren't a lot of creatures in here, but that's the reason why I put other things that help create tokens for you, so you can get that draw trigger. It also has its own way to create tokens. So for 1 white and 3 generic, you can create a 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature token. Not bad, considering that you also need ways to put blockers on the field. Now, none of it's flying, but you do have equipment that I'll show you in a little bit that should help give some things flying. It also unearths for 4. Hopefully you don't have to worry about that, though. Cataclysmic Gearhulk is a 5-cast 4/5 artifact creature construct that has vigilance and another ability that really helps with Voltron-style decks. It says when it enters the battlefield, each player chooses an artifact, a creature, an enchantment, and a planeswalker from among the permanents that they control, and sacrifices the rest. Obviously for you, you're going to probably try to keep Balan on the battlefield, and whatever the best equipment that you have on the battlefield is, you will keep that. I don't have a whole lot in here as far as planeswalkers and enchantments, but there are a couple of planeswalkers that will be at the end of the video. And then we've got 2 more creatures that are utility. First one is Meteor Golem. It's a 7-cast 3/3. Hopefully you'll have some cost reduction on the board for your artifacts. Probably bring it down. I have 3 cost reductions for just generically for artifacts. So hopefully this will be a 4-cast 3/3 that when it enters the battlefield, destroy target non-land permanent and opponent controls. That's in here just so that I can have more ways to destroy your opponent's stuff. And then of course the last card is Angel of Ruins, which is a 7-cast 5/7. It's an artifact creature, so that will get reduction of cost if you have things out that do that. And it's an angel, which doesn't really matter a whole lot, but it's an artifact creature that matters. It has flying, that does matter a lot. And then when it enters the battlefield, exile up to 2 target artifacts and/or enchantments. And also, if you don't need to cast this for some reason, you can plane cycle it to go get a planes out of your library and put it in your hand. The biggest section of this deck will be in the artifacts because most of them will be equipments. There are at least 20, maybe 24 different artifacts in here, and most of them are equipments. I'll show you what I've got. Remember, this is a budget deck, so it's not going to have things that the previous version of Balan I made for somebody will have. We'll start off with things like this. Short Sword. It's a 1-to-cast, 1-to-equip equipment that gives the creature a buff of +1/+1, and that's what most of these will have, but we'll have a couple that are not buffing your creature, but giving them some type of utility ability. So I've got actually 3 cards that do that. It's this one, Honed, and I'm going to say this wrong, Kopish. I think that's the way it's said. It's 1-to-cast, 1-to-equip, gives the creature a buff of +1/+1. And Leonin Scimitar, which is again 1-to-cast, 1-to-equip, and gives the creature a buff of +1/+1. Those are in there because they're budget friendly and they work. Then we have things like Bone Splitter, 1-to-cast, 1-to-equip, and gives the equipped creature +2/+0. Golem Skin Gauntlets, 1-to-cast, 2-to-equip, gives the equipped creature +1/+0 for each other equipment attached to it. Flare Husk, 1-to-cast, 2-to-equip, gives the equipped creature +1/+1. However, it has Living Weapon, which means that when this equipment enters the battlefield, you also create a 0/0 Black Germ creature token and then attach this to it. So technically it's a 0/0 that's got +1/+1, and if you unequip it without any other equipment attached to it, the germ will die because it will have a 0 toughness. Darksteel Axe, 1-to-cast, 2-to-equip, gives the equipped creature +2/+0, and this card itself is indestructible, so it can't go away. However, you can sacrifice it. That's the downside. Trusty Machete, another 1-to-cast, 2-to-equip. This one gives the equipped creature +2/+1. Onaganata, 1-to-cast, 2-to-equip. Equipped creature gets +3/+0 and trample, and that's important. Trample is really important. It also says that Onaganata can be equipped only to a creature with power 3 or greater. Luckily, our equipment's going to give creatures that don't have a power of 3 or greater that power, but Balan also has a power of 3 just on its own, so that's why this is in here. Bloodforged Battle Axe, 1 to cast, 2 to equip. Gives the equipped creature +2/+0, but then it also says whenever the equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you create a token that's a copy of Bloodforged Battle Axe. So you get a whole bunch of them if you start hitting people. Team Pennant is a 1 to cast, 3 to equip regularly, or you can equip a creature token for 1. And that's in here because there are ways to create a lot of tokens, so why not? The equipped creature will get +1/+1 and has Vigilance and, again, Trample, which is really important. Vigilance is important, too, when you have not a lot of creatures out, so you can attack without having to worry about blocking later. Mandibular Kite is a 1 to cast, 4 to equip, and the equip is actually 1 white and 3 of any instead of 4 generic. It has Living Weapon, which means that 0/0 Germ comes into play, and it attaches to it. And it gives the equipped creature +1/+1 and Flying, which is very important. Colossus Hammer, this is a staple in all equipment-style Voltron decks. It's 1 to cast, 8 to equip, and gives the equipped creature +10/+10, but it loses Flying. The trick to this is that you attach the Colossus Hammer first, and then equip something that gives a creature Flying. Because of timestamps, it will then have Flying. Short Bow, 2 to cast, 1 to equip. The equipped creature gets +1/+1, Vigilance, and Reach. Reach is not as good as Flying, but at least now you can block flying creatures. Aeronaut's Wings, 2 to cast, 2 to equip. The equipped creature will now get +1/+0 and Flying. Again, Flying is important. Mask of Avacyn, 2 to cast, 3 to equip. The equipped creature will now get +1/+2 and Hexproof. This is one of 2 cards that will help protect, most likely, Balan, to keep it from being targeted. Hero's Blade, 2 to cast, 4 to equip. The equipped creature will get +3/+2, and it says whenever a legendary creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may attach Hero's Blade to it. So if you've got Hero's Blade out early, and then you cast Balan, it will automatically attach to it. Maw of the Skyclaves, 3 to cast, 4 to equip. That equip cost is actually 2 white and 2 generic instead of 4 generic. When it enters the battlefield, attach it to target creature you control, which is always nice. And the equipped creature will get +2/+2, Flying, and First Strike. More keyword salad there. Grafted Exoskeleton. This will give you an alternate way to win quicker, as if though 21 commander damage wasn't quick enough, this provides Infect, which brings it down to 10. And it can go to any creature, so it won't even have to be the commander that does it. So it's 4 to cast and 2 to equip. The equipped creature will get +2/+2 in Infect, but the downside is that whenever the Exoskeleton becomes unattached from a permanent, you must sacrifice that permanent. For the most part, that creature is probably going to be dead, and it will fall off anyway, so it won't matter. Those are the buffs. These are the utility coming up. Infiltration Lens, 1 to cast, 1 to equip. Whenever the equipped creature becomes blocked, you may draw 2 cards. This is another way that I'm hoping that you can get some card draw in from mono white. Explorer Scope, 1 to cast, 1 to equip. Whenever the equipped creature attacks, look at the top card of your library, and if it's a land card, doesn't matter if it's a basic land or not, keep that in mind. You may put it onto the battlefield tapped. This is one of those ways that I was trying to thin your deck out a little bit by trying to get lands out of the way, so that's why this is in here. I use that a lot in a lot of decks that use equipments. Rogue's Gloves, 2 to cast, 2 to equip. Whenever the equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. More card draw. Whisper Silk Cloak, this is the final equipment. There are 2 more artifacts after this, but they're not equipment. So this is 3 to cast, 2 to equip. The equipped creature is now unblockable, which is always nice, especially if you have it on Balan. But then the second part says, the equipped creature has Shroud. Here's the trick with Shroud. You can't equip your own creatures if it has Shroud. So you want this to be the last thing that equips to it if you're trying to move some equipment around. And the other 2 artifacts, again, 3 artifacts. It was 3 artifacts. They are not equipment, but they are utility. So first one is Boombox. 2 to cast, you pay 6, tap, and sacrifice it to destroy up to 1 target artifact, up to 1 target creature, and up to 1 target land. I have this in here because I just needed more removal. I wanted more spot removal. Same thing with the Bumbleflower's Sharepot. It is a 2 to cast artifact that when it enters the battlefield, you create a food token, so at least you can gain some life. And then for 5, tapping and sacking it, you can destroy target non-land permanent, but only as a sorcery. And the last artifact in this build is Golem Foundry. It's a 3 to cast artifact that says whenever you cast an artifact spell, which should be a lot in this deck, you may put a counter on it. May doesn't make sense here. You're always going to put the counter on it. Don't worry about the may. Just put a counter on it. And then it says, at instant speed, you can remove 3 of those counters from it to create a 3/3 colorless Golem artifact creature token. I have this in here again because there's not a lot of creatures in the deck, and you're going to need blockers and possibly some fodder. Next, I'm going to show you the instants and sorceries of the deck. All of them are removal. Most of them spot removal, some of them board wipes. So first up is Unwanted Remake, a 1 to cast instant that says destroy target creature, and its controller manifests dread. It's not the greatest spot removal, but it just simply destroys a creature for 1 at instant speed. Thought it was great, and if they manifest dread and it ends up being something really crappy, you win. Path to Exile, we all know Path to Exile. It's just great spot removal. Swords to Plowshares, same thing as Path to Exile. Requisition Raid. So this is a 1-to-cast sorcery with Spree. It does nothing if you cast it for just 1 white. You need to add the additional costs. Spree means that you pay an additional cost. In this case, it's either 1, 2, or 3 generic mana. And for each one, you can choose whatever one you want. You can either destroy target artifact, destroy target enchantment, or put a +1/+1 counter on each creature target player controls. And for each one you put into this, you can do that thing. It's actually very versatile. Fragmentize, 1-to-cast sorcery that destroys an artifact or enchantment with a mana value of 4 or less. You have no idea how many really good artifacts out there are 4 mana or less. Disenchant, the OG, just 2-to-cast destroy target artifact or enchantment. Exercise, 2-to-cast sorcery that says exile target artifact, enchantment, or creature with power 4 or greater, so it's versatile as well. And then I've got in here Make Your Move, which is the same thing, only now it's a 3-to-cast instant version of that. Return to Dust, 4-to-cast instant that exiles target artifact or enchantment, and if you cast a spell during your main phase, you can do it again. Slaughter the Strong, it's one of those for a Voltron deck, it works perfectly. It's a 3-to-cast sorcery that says each player chooses any number of creatures that they control with a total power of 4 or less. Then sacrifices all other creatures they control. Balan can now at least have 1 equipment on it that would give it a buff of +1 plus something, and it would still survive. And then the last one is Single Combat. 5-to-cast sorcery that says each player chooses a creature or a planeswalker they control, then sacrifices the rest. Players can't cast creature or planeswalker spells until the end of your next turn. The reason why I like this, and I like Slaughter the Strong, is the sacrifice gets around indestructible. And finally, the last 2 cards that I include in the deck are a planeswalker duo that I like to put in all my white decks that I make on a budget, because they kind of help each other out and help you out. So it's Teo, the Shield Mage, and the Wanderer. So Teo is a 3-to-cast planeswalker that enters play with 5 loyalty counters. It has a static ability of you have hexproof, so that helps protect you. Then it has 1 down tick ability for a loyalty ability that for taking 2 loyalty counters off, you can create a 0/3 wall creature token with Defender. It's only really usable twice unless you have a way to proliferate counters onto it, which I didn't put in here. But the 0/3 walls help protect you a little bit. Plus they're fodder for other things. The pairing to that I like to use is the Wanderer, which is 4-to-cast, comes into play with 5 loyalty counters, and it has a static ability of that says prevent all non-combat damage that would be dealt to you and other permanents you control. Then it has a loyalty ability for taking 2 loyalty counters off. You can exile target creature with a power of 4 or greater. This is great for a lot of the higher-end commanders. So I like these 2 together because they help give you hexproof and prevent damage to you. They put out blockers for you, and then they also remove creatures from the game. So I like this pairing a lot. I put this in a lot of my budget decks. I'm going to go out on a limb and just assume that you didn't catch that there was an infinite combo in the cards that I just showed you. If you did, I commend you, because it's sort of an obscure one. It uses the card I said I'd get back to earlier, Crackdown Construct, combined with Pure Steel Paladin. This combination gets around needing a bunch of mana to beef up the construct to a ridiculous size, and how it does this is explained in the link at the top of your screen. This combo can't help you wipe the board of all of your opponents, but it can help at least eliminate 1 at a time at least. No, it's not the best combo in the game, but it is a funny one that goes well with the theme of the deck at least. And that, my friends, was my latest custom commander build that used Balan, Wandering Knight on a $60 budget. I liked that I was able to differentiate the 2 different builds, and that the budget was only a very small reason for the differences. I wanted to play around a little with how this commander plays specifically, because I'm interested in building it as my mono white commander for my 32 deck challenge. So what do you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts about this custom commander build in the comments. Well, my friends, that's all I've got for you this week. Thanks for watching, and if you're looking for more Magic content to watch, please go browse through my channel, as I'm sure you'll find more of my videos that you'll enjoy. Before you head off though, please, real quick, smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet, so you'll be notified when I release new content. Have a great day, and I will see you all next week.